did not know, give me the opportunity to say to you that this project, Amzie Moore, is a collaborative effort between the Baldwin County Board of Supervisors, Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and Delta State University. So it's befitting that we're here today with our author today, Mr. Anderson, because this is some of the things we want to bring to this home. The Amzie Moore home was restored, so we do not forget our past. That we remember our past unfiltered, so we cannot make the same mistakes going forward. So I'm here just to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for your time and coming out today. If I did not say it, my name is William Hooker, and I am the president of being the county administrator here in Baldwin County. But at this time, I'm going to ask our archivist from Delta State University, Mr. C.T., if he'll come forward so he can introduce our author, the person you came to see today. So come on, C.T.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us. This is more of a reorientation that we're wanting to take with the Amzie Moore House for this to not just be a museum, but be a site where stuff happens, be a community space. Also, if this is your first time in the museum, you just raise your hand, just so I can see. Yeah, cool.
Shame. Shame.
Well,
I'm here.
It's been a while. Yeah, we'll welcome everybody. So, if you don't know much about Amzie Moore, that's okay. But we're in his house, and so maybe the base thing to know about him: Amzie Moore was born in 1911 and died in 82. So the Mississippi that he was born in and the Mississippi that he died in are two radically different places, and that's largely because of the work that he did and the community that he fostered, mostly in this house and in the community of Cleveland. A lot of the folks that met here with him would go on to become the architects of Freedom Summer. And Amzie himself was organizing much earlier than 64. We have, from his own interviews, we know that he was doing significant work as early as 1940. So with that in mind, we like to use the space to continue that legacy and let the house be this place where we continue to foster education, empowerment, and community resilience. And with that said, I was really excited that Devery Anderson responded so pleasantly to my cold email when I found out he was going to be back in Mississippi and agreed to talk in the Amzie Moore House. Let me grab his bio. So Devery S. Anderson is the author of Emmett Till, The Murder That Shocked the World and Propelled the Civil Rights Movements. And I'll say there's a lot of books on Emmett Till. I think that Anderson's book is the quintessential text. It is so thoroughly researched and beautifully written. And it's the basis for the ABC series Women of the Movement. Anderson's most recent book is A Slow, Calculated Lynching, The Story of Clyde Kennard. That came out last year, and I was very excited to see that because Clyde Kennard should be a household name, but we don't know that name as well. So grabbing Devery's second book would be a great way to catch up on that story. Anderson earned a BA in history from the University of Utah and an MA in publishing from George Washington University. Anderson is the marketing manager for Signature Books in Salt Lake City and the editor or co-editor of 4 books relating to Mormons in the West. I'm so glad that you guys are here and that Devery's here to speak. And I'm sure that we'll have time for questions afterward, but for now I want to turn it over to Devery Anderson.
A little update. In February, the company I was working for downsized and I got laid off. So I'm no longer working in publishing doing marketing for a publisher, but I still doing my own stuff. So I'm keeping busy writing my own stuff and writing for other people, doing some ghost writing and other books. And so kind of like that, working from home, working my pajamas every day if I want. So it's kind of nice. So thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be here. Amzie Moore was a player that showed up in my book because he was one of those who helped search for witnesses with the Emmett Till, when the Emmett Till case was unfolding. And so to be in his home, this is great. It's the first time. I've been to Cleveland a few times, but first time in the house. Now, is that as big as that gets, or is that?
Sadly, that's what we're working on.
Okay. And I guess, can you all see it okay? Okay, then we're okay. So So that's the book cover. I have copies of both books here if anyone's interested. I'm happy to sign them afterwards, and if you want to buy copies, they're here. So just take that if you're interested. But what I thought I'd do today, because I assume everybody knows about the Emmett Till case. Like, is anybody that isn't familiar with it? I would think you probably are. And so I kept that in mind as I thought about what I wanted to talk about today. And to give a quick overview, because some of the stuff I want to talk about, I kind of will pause and talk about these things, but the book I wrote took 10 years to research and write. And the reason being is because I want to do a very comprehensive book on the subject. There were so many stories behind the scenes that unfolded during the trial. And then later, when the FBI, or when the federal government reopened the case in 2004 and assigned it to the FBI to investigate, a lot more came out then. And so there was a lot that I knew I was going to put in the book. I knew that, I assumed when they opened the investigation that they would learn several things. I assumed that they were going to exhume Emmett Till's body. We'd learn more about how he died. We would learn for sure that it was him. We always knew that. But people, at the time of the murder, the defense made a case that, how do we know that's even Emmett Till's body? He wasn't recognizable. And so they laid that to rest in 2005. And they found the trial transcript, which had been missing, and I had this feeling they were going to find one somewhere. And also found the murder weapon. And so we learned a lot, and I realized that more information is coming. Now is a good time to write a book, because I can not only write about the cases that unfolded and essentially ended in 1955 to 56, but when it was resurrected in 2004, I wanted to be the one, or the first one, to write about that. And so I did so. But there were a lot of things, there were a lot of difficulties, which we'll get to, but just as a quick overview, as we know, when we think about Emmett Till, we always think of him as this 14-year-old boy, which he was, from Chicago. But when you think about 1941, he would be turning 83 in July. Could easily still be alive. His mother lived to be 81, I believe, and he could very well still be here. So it gives us a little bit more perspective on how much his life was cut short. All the years of living to become a father, grandfather, and probably great-grandfather now, that never got to happen. And he was raised in Argo, Illinois, but he lived in Detroit for a little bit with his mother after 1950, but they moved back to Chicago in 1951, and so we think of him as a Chicago youth, which he was for the most part. And these pictures of him and his mother were taken. He was 13 here. It was the final Christmas of his life in December of 1953. Now, his uncle Moses Wright came to Mississippi, or came to Chicago. He was living in Money, Mississippi. He came to Chicago for a funeral. Wanted Emmett and his grandson, and Mo's grandson, Wheeler Parker. He's the larger kid on the bike. The bike on the right, he's the one there on the back of the bike. Emmett Till is on the left. That was taken when Emmett was quite a bit younger than he was when most of the photos we've seen of him. So they boarded this train in Chicago on August 20th, 1955, and they planned to stay for 2 weeks, the final 2 weeks of the summer vacation. And we know what happened from here. He went to the Bryant Grocery and Meat Market in Money, Mississippi, and here's where the story begins to unfold. And for me, here's the store today. I don't know if you most of you been to Money, or that's how the store looks today. The top floor and the second floor, and the roof caved in. That's a photo I took from the inside of the store. I went into a back door a couple years ago and felt like I was risking my life, because most of those boards had huge nails sticking out. You had to climb over different boards and hope you didn't fall. And if I was going to fall, there were enough nails there to poke enough holes in me that I would have, not sure what I would have come out looking like in the end. But that's from inside the store. That's the back side of the store. So I'm standing in what would have been the apartment of Roy and Carolyn Bryant in the back of the store. And the local post mistress, she was a woman, I believe, lived upstairs. But they ran the store downstairs, and part of the store today are the two front doors, and that's there at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And if you've been there, you've seen those. So they are there. And those are the doors Emmett Till would have walked through on August 24th, 1955. So Carolyn O'Brien was working behind the store, and one of the things that was so difficult for me in writing the book was trying to figure out what happened in the store. We know what happened outside the store. So Emmett goes in the store. He's in there briefly alone with Carolyn O'Brien. She's the one who lives to tell, and her version, she contradicted herself. But also what happened outside happened in front of witnesses. There were several people congregated in front of the store when Emmett and his group arrived in Mose Wright's car. And one source says there are about 20 people already out there. So not everybody saw or heard everything that was going on. They were playing checkers, and people were playing checkers, and then people were watching the people playing checkers, and others were just congregated in little groups around the store. And one of the ways we know this, and we've learned just recently, or at least I have learned just recently, a little bit more about what happened in the store. And I am doing a second edition of the book, and it's going to bring the story up to date from 2015 when the book came out up to the present. And you might wonder, well, what's there to tell? But in the last 9 years, there've been a couple of movies, one theatrical one called Till, and then the one I was involved with called Women of the Movement. That was a 6-part miniseries on ABC. There's a lot of information about that and how those came to be, but also there was a second FBI investigation that opened in 2018 and concluded in 2021. We'll be writing about that. Since then, Carolyn Bryant died, and so we can bring that up to date. Her unpublished memoir that she had written, which was supposed to be sequestered until I think 2038, when she spoke to author historian Timothy Tyson. Well, Jerry Mitchell of the used to be the Clarion Ledger investigative reporter. Probably most of you know who he is. He was able to secure a copy of that. He sent a copy to me and a few of his friends, and so I've had it and gone through it several times. And so there's a lot to say about that. And so I think I'm going to add about 3 chapters, going back and revising some of the earlier ones, adding some information. One of the things, it's very interesting, at Florida State University, there's an Emmett Till archive there that's been building. Professor Davis Houck there contacted everybody who's written on Emmett Till, all the Till scholars, and said, will you donate your research files to FSU so we can have a one-stop shop, basically, for people writing on Emmett Till. So most of us agreed to do that. One of the people who's been long dead was a man named Joseph Tobias, who was Mamie Till's attorney. His name comes up in the book, and if you research the case, his name comes up quite a bit. Well, a few years ago, somebody in his family donated his papers to the archives. And I went through and scanned, because they're scanned now and they're online, and I went through and downloaded them. And I didn't look at what I downloaded because I thought I'll get back to this later. But Dale Killinger, who was the FBI agent who investigated the case, he said, did you see this one document? And he sent it to me. He said, yeah, I downloaded it, but I haven't read it yet. I said, read it. You'll be surprised there's some stuff in here. So I did, and I was thrilled to learn something new, a smoking gun, if you will, at least that on the floor. They came up with some names of people who had never really been talked about before that had some involvement in the case. Now, before we get into that, here's Carolyn Bryant from summer of 2022. She died, in fact, it was a year ago today that news of her death hit the papers. And Jerry Mitchell called me. I was in Mississippi last year, and he called me and said that Carolyn died and wanted a statement from me, and he published an article later that day, and that broke the news. That was a year ago today. When we'll go back to the story incident before we talk about the kidnapping, but and here's where memory, if you're a historian or a scholar, or if you've talked to people just about their past, you may have learned that memory is probably the least reliable source of saw it. But then you look at earlier statements from these very same people, and they're contradicting themselves. They're saying something different. In this case, a lot of people who witnessed the store incident, Emmett Till's cousins, and I think it was a few of those who were there. They said one thing in 1955, and then in the years since have said something completely different in some cases. And so, as a historian, you have to really try to figure out which stories are the most accurate. And usually, you're going to go back to the earliest ones. If you talk about it 2 or 3 days after the event, a little more accurate than trying to remember 70 years later. We're approaching the 70th anniversary of the Till murder. But there are a couple of people that show up in this. This document is dated February 3rd, 1958. It's 3 years after, actually 2.5 years after the Emmett Till murder. And it's an interview because Mamie Till, Emmett's mother, was suing a group that had portrayed Emmett in a way she didn't like, which we'll be talking about a little bit. But so her attorney, Joseph Tobias, gathered some people together, gathered Mamie, gathered Simeon Wright, the youngest son of Mose Wright, and Wheeler Parker, a second cousin of Emmett, they were all there at the store, and they were all there at the kidnapping. So Joseph Tobias interviewed them 2.5 years after the event. In this, we learned that there were 8 people that got into Mose Wright's car to drive into money. The names of most of them had always been part of the reporting in the earliest newspaper accounts. But one of the newspaper reporters said that a boy named Albert Johnson Jr. of Slaughter, Mississippi, which is nearby, that he was the one who went into the store to get Emmett out when the boys became worried about him being in there. Simeon Wright always said it was him that went in at Maurice Wright, his brother's behest. Well, all of a sudden Albert Johnson Jr. shows up. And I thought, well, there's this, Maurice Wright is telling, who's one of Moses Wright's sons, said that Albert Johnson Jr. came in, grabbed Till by the arm, and made him come out. And I thought, well, why does anybody else ever talk about him? So when I interviewed Wheeler Parker and Simeon Wright, I asked them, was there a guy named Albert Johnson Jr. there? Simeon got really quiet, and Wheeler said, I remember him. He's a cousin of my cousin Felton Parker. And I said, was he there that night at the store? And he said, I don't remember him being there. Well, in this interview, they say he rode with them, so his name shows up again. And then I found another statement from Moses Wright saying, yeah, the boys went into money that night. My boys, Emmett, the girl, Ruth Crawford, and a Johnson boy from Slaughter. So we have now 3 sources saying that Albert Johnson Jr. was at the store with them. Now, only one source said he was the person inside the one who brought Emmett out. Found out recently that he's still alive, and someone is searching to find out where he lives so I can get a hold of him, because one other person who recently got a hold of him is saying that he told him that, yes, I'm the one who went in the store to get Emmett out. So if I can get a hold of him, I'll find out, was Emmett really in the store alone with Carolyn at any point? Could anything have happened briefly while the two were alone? That's one person's name who now shows up. Another one, in the FBI investigation, if you remember, there were different names that began appearing in the news as the trial was unfolding. You remember the names of Levi Two-Tide Collins, who was one of the black men on the back of the truck, or at least that people were saying he was on the back of the truck. Henry Lee Loggins was on the back of the truck. So these are the 2 black men on the back whose names surfaced. And then about a month or 2 after the trial, Dr. T.R.M. Howard did his own investigation. He learned that a guy named Joe Willie Hubbard was involved. He just mentions it briefly, but then when Henry Lee Loggins is interviewed in the 80s, or in the early 2000s, he mentions Joe Willie Hubbard, and said that he and Joe Willie dated 2 sisters, and that's all he said about him. So So these three names show up, but during the FBI investigation in 2004, a man named Johnny B. Washington, his name comes up for the first time that anybody knew of. It's like, okay, when it shows up 50 years later, did he just want to claim he was part of the case? He was dead by then, but so his family were making the claims. So he wasn't even there, so it was another generation removed from him. His name showed up, and people remembered him. Simeon Wright said, yeah, he worked for Roy Bryant. I remember that. Well, in this interview, it's interesting. They talk about everything at the store, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, let me find it here. I wanted to print this up, but I didn't have a chance, so I'm scrolling through my computer on this document. They said, let me scroll up. This is Maurice Wright talking in 1958. And it's interesting because Wheeler's talking too, and he said Wheeler went in the store with Emmett Till to buy an ice cream cone. So he's saying he bought an ice cream cone. This isn't a big deal, but you know, later on I think he said he was buying gum or some candy. But he said in here that he went to buy an ice cream cone. He left Emmett in the store alone because he wanted to go outside and eat his ice cream cone, which is what, since again, this is 1958, so I think it's a little more accurate. And then Maurice starts talking. He said, Emmett came out of the store and stood on the side of Maurice. And while he stood there, the lady, meaning Mrs. Bryant, came out of the store and walked over to an automobile, which was there maybe 50 feet from the checkerboard, to her car. Somebody whistled, and Maurice said he does not even know who. He was playing checkers and wasn't watching. And this whistle was the two-toned so-called wolf whistle, which he demonstrates. Mrs. Bryant didn't even turn around. Maurice kept playing checkers for about 10 minutes. And then a boy by the name of John B. Washington came up to Maurice and said, didn't you see Bobo whistling at that white woman? Maurice said no, and the boy added, you better get him out of here. Johnny B. Washington is a grown man who had been talking to Ruthie Mae, who was the girl that went into this, got in the car with the boys when they went to the store. John B. said to Maurice's best recollection, declared that he observed Bobo whistling, which is Emmett Till's nickname, whistling in the direction of a woman. Then they were all rushing to leave. Maurice, after they all hurried into the car, stopped to reach down for cigarettes, and they said, come on, let's go, let's go. This one's interesting because when I interviewed Wheeler Parker and Simeon Wright in 2007, Wheeler Parker remembered Maurice dropping and burning a cigarette and saying, let's go, and it felt like forever when he tried to find the cigarette. And here they talk about this in 1958. And so then Maurice said, I'm in no hurry, and they said that Emmett shouldn't have whistled or some such thing as that, and then they all left. Johnny B. had said before the boys had left, now look here, that woman has gone to her car to get her pistol. Now I'm told, these people are told, that the woman made it a nightly custom to go out to get her pistol as darkness fell. And that is quite possible that Johnny B. is a busybody, in a busybody role, had run up to the woman later and said, didn't you hear that northern boy whistle to you? But then he said that Johnny B., they believe Johnny B. Washington was the person who told Roy Bryant where Moses Wright lived. In the FBI report, Robert Wright, who didn't even wake up during the kidnapping, said that he thought he remembered his father, Moses Wright, saying he thought he may have heard Johnny B. Washington's voice outside the house. So I think now we know that Johnny B. Washington was involved. They called him a busybody and thought he was the one who told Roy Bryant where they lived. And since Moses Wright thought he heard this voice, his voice outside, and then during the FBI investigation, some of his family members are telling the FBI that Johnny B. Washington was involved. We now, I think, can put him, he's not just a name that surfaces 50 years later. We can place him at the store the night that this happened, and them referring to him as a busybody would indicate that he was the one who told Moses Wright told Roy Bryant about the whistle and whatever he saw happen outside, and he led the men to Moses Wright's house. He was probably the third man that Moses Wright saw on the doorstep the night of the kidnapping. So this is just stuff that I've learned in the last few weeks. It was only a few weeks ago that I learned about this from Dale, and so this is going to go into the updated portion of my book. And this is where we learned that there are about 20 people outside the store. So when a crowd that size, whatever happened wasn't just in front of everybody. Some people were playing checkers, some people were watching that, some people were in circles like talking, such as Ruthie May and Johnny B. Washington. So now we can understand a little bit more why not everybody heard or saw the same thing. It doesn't explain why some people contradict their own selves later on, but now we can have a better feeling about why not everybody knew what was happening in the store that night. So this is all going in the new edition of the book, and I was thrilled to find Johnny B. Washington's name showing up early on. Now, of course, the night of the kidnapping, besides the third person that stayed on the porch that Moses Wright talked about, we know that J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant are the ones who came into the home with a flashlight and a gun, demanded the boy from Chicago. And they're the ones, of course, that went on trial. So they're the two names that were always associated with everything. But on the third day of the trial, or the second day of the trial, all of a sudden the prosecution announced they learned about 3 surprise witnesses who, the one in the middle, Willie Reed, was walking to a store a few hours after the kidnapping. He's in Drew, Mississippi, and as he's walking by this shed, there's 2 sheds there, the one on the left with the 3 open bays. There's a little room, in fact, I've got a closer picture. That little room on the end, as he walked by the shed around 6:30 that morning, he heard beating going on inside, someone being beaten. And he knew this plantation. He didn't live on this plantation. He lived on a neighboring one, but he was walking through on his way to the store to go to the store for his grandmother. He knew this plantation was managed by Leslie Milam, who was another brother to J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant. And so, after he's walking for a bit, he hears someone leave that shed, come out that door, and he turns around and he sees J.W. Milam, who he also knew because he had seen him on the plantation visiting his brother a lot. And he came out, he said he had a gun on his side, he could get a drink of water from the well, then went back in. You can still hear this beating going on. So Willie Reed is the one who was able to determine that there were other people involved. In fact, before he passed the shed, he had been walking on the street several minutes earlier when a green and white pickup truck passed him, and he saw 4 white men in the front of the truck. It was a 1955 Chevrolet pickup, and I had 4 people in there. We had one on set for Women of the Movement, and that's kind of a small vehicle, but if they had some black men in the back, they weren't going to sit with them, so they all crammed in the front. So he saw 4 white men in the front, he saw 4 black men in the back. And he identified one of them later as he saw the Emmett Till's picture in the paper. He said, that's the person I saw in the back of the truck. And then when he passed the shed a few minutes later, the truck was parked there and you could hear this beating going on. So Willie Reed is the one who helped us know that the Emmett Till was taken out of Tallahatchie County. He was kidnapped in LaFleur County, that's where money is. So the kidnapping charges would come out of LaFleur County. The body was found in Tallahatchie County, but and that's why the body was turned over to the sheriff of Tallahatchie County, and the murder trial was set up in Sumner in Tallahatchie County, but later determined, we know now that he was actually killed in Sunflower County, so the trial should have been held there. At that point, all we had was Willie Reed's testimony that he heard beating, and the judge determined that since nobody heard a gunshot, he was probably beaten there and shot somewhere else. But